I think one finds oneself through these classic works of literature. Thank you everybody for your support, to all the new subscribers that I have. In fact, I should probably have said that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Hey, how's it going, folks? I'm going to do a wee catch-up for February. Let you know what I'm reading, and this is in lieu of a wrap-up for January, because I only read one book in January. Well, only finished one book in January, so that's an easy wrap-up. And even that one was... I kind of made myself finish it by the end of the month, because it was looming. It was holding me back a wee bit. So the book I finished in January is Mark Galeotti's Putin's Wars, and I don't have a copy to hold up for you because I listened to it on audio. And I've been a fan of Mark Galeotti since I read other of his books. We Need to Talk About Putin was one, and A Short History of Russia was another. His writing style is accessible, which really helps when you're reading Putin's Wars, because it did become a bit of a list of military hardware in some points. So that was a challenge in itself. The book, though, yeah, fantastic. It goes into, really, if you want to know how the Ukraine war happened, then this is a really good book for you to take a look at. It goes back to the rise of Putin, and it starts out with the Victory Day parade in Moscow, which is a huge affair, and they clear the streets and they have military hardware trundling up, I don't know, whatever boulevard it is, or chaussee or Prospect. And this goes back to Stalin's time, when he would have a revolutionary parade to mark the beginning of the October Revolution. So Russians love their military hardware. And he goes on to discuss the hardware fairs that you would find around the world, where different countries would come and display their latest technologies, which is fascinating. And then we go through the different conflicts that Russia's been involved with. The two Chechnya conflicts obviously loom large. So you get a lot of information there that, I mean, I did read about it. I think I was a student at the time of the second conflict. Was it the first one? It would be this. I was a student both times, but I was doing my Masters during the second conflict, so 98, 99. It was Putin's kind of... it was a thing that made him popular and kind of allowed him to become president in a sense, you know, to get public love, high opinion from the Russian populace. He was Prime Minister at the time, 1999, and obviously became president in 2000. So he was the one that basically won the war, where the first conflict in Chechnya had not been a victory for Russia. So we go through that, and then we go into Georgia, we go to Syria, and then we've got other minor skirmishes, and then into Ukraine 2014, and then through to the special military operation, as he calls it, which we all call a war, because spades are spades and wars are wars, right? And so, yeah, it goes into lots and lots of detail. Military structures, battalions and divisions and brigades, lots of names of generals and some of their history, lots of politicians. It's a very, very well researched book. And it's the kind of book that, you know, if you're at all interested in Russia's military, I think this is the go-to. Although I say that having not read any others, but I learned so much from it, and it's highly recommended. It's, as I said, his writing is accessible, which you really need when you're going through this kind of military description and stuff. What I'll say about the audiobook, the narrator, I forget his name, but he did a fantastic job. In fact, I should look it up, shouldn't I? Give you that information live on camera. So if I open up my Notion page, David Sibley. David Sibley does a fantastic job of all the pronunciations. There's a lot of Russian acronyms, a lot of Russian names, places, etc. and organisations. So when he gives you the acronym or the abbreviation for an organisation, he then goes on to explain the whole name. And David Sibley does a great job with that. So that's something to bear in mind if you're an audiobook listener. So that was the first book of the year for me, and so far the only one I've finished still, and highly, highly recommended. So that was my January. During the month I was also reading lots of other stuff, so let's take a look at some of that. Right, first up, I can't go any further without mentioning the Master and Margarita. So this is my read-along book for January and February. And I'm writing it up on Substack, I'm putting out videos, and I am putting it out as a podcast. So it's a real multimedia project for me, which I'm enjoying immensely. I'm keeping up with it. We're into week 5 now, and I'm keeping up with it. I've got my routine going, and I'm having a great time. I mean, this is one of my favourite novels, but to be going this deep into it, it's, yeah, for me, very rewarding, and I hope for you viewers as well, or readers or listeners, whichever one you happen to be. So it's a fabulous, fabulous book. A little factoid I just learned was that Sergei Prokofiev was born in the same year as Bulgakov, and he died on the same day as Stalin, 5th of March 1953. That was new information for me, and I've been putting together a timeline, I guess you would call it, in Notion that shows birth dates and death dates and compresses it into timeline so you can see who was around at the same time. It's absolutely fascinating. I love this kind of thing, and it's very revealing just to see who was on the globe at the same time, who was in Russia at the same time, who might have met, and, you know, imagine a writer's party or something where all these people were able to come together and meet. It's just fascinating to me to think that these composers and musicians and writers, they were all in the same place at the same time. They might not have met, who knows? Well, ChatGPT actually, I've been using that to find out who met, or if they met. So yeah, it's fascinating. So that's the Master Margarita. That'll be finishing at the end of February, and yeah, as I say, I'm having a great time with it. I've started to plan my next read along, which is going to be Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, which I've never actually read. You might be surprised to hear. This is my wife's favourite Russian classic. She doesn't generally enjoy Russian classics, and this one is her copy, and I'm delighted to see that it's got annotations in it, so I'm very excited to read her annotations as I go. It's going to add to the experience for me. This is the translation by, let me tell you, Max and, is it Max Hayward? Where does it say? So I only just started researching this yesterday, so I haven't got these names in my head yet. Max Hayward and Manya Harari. So I believe they translated it not long after the book's publication. So it's interesting to be reading two 20th century Russian classics back to back. You know, obviously YouTube and Substack, they love their 19th century classics, as of course do I. I'm reading War and Peace again right now, which we'll get to. Anna Karenina, Dostoevsky, you know, but 20th century classics I think get less attention, and I'm hoping to change that a little bit with the books that I'm reading on my Substack. So I'll be leading a group through Dr. Zhivago starting from the beginning of April, and my plan is to read a chapter a week which means it's going to take us 4 months. So what I found with the Master and Margarita is that the current reading pace of 50-ish pages a week, it's a struggle for me because it's not allowing me to read some of the secondary literature that I would really like to read. It's more or less full time along with, the other stuff I've got going on. So this one, it's about the same size in page count as Master and Margarita, but I'm planning to do it over 4 months rather than 2. So it's very manageable. If you want to join, you'll be able to read 1 chapter a week, which is sometimes 20 pages, sometimes 30 pages. Obviously chapters differ in length, but it'll be very, very manageable, and you'll be able to do it along with what other projects you've got going on or whatever books you're reading, that sort of stuff. So Dr. Zhivago, starting in April, running through to the end of July this year. And if you'd like to join, I'll put a link below where you can order the books using an affiliate link, because that will help me out a great deal. This, as I said, is Max Hayward and Manya Harari translation. There is a Pavir and Volokhonsky translation, which I don't yet own. I will be buying, so I can do comparisons, etc. I have been doing a bit of research looking at, is it Pasternak's granddaughter, who wrote an article for The Guardian. If I remember, I'll pop it down below, where she discussed some of the differences in the translations, and her preference was for the original Hayward Harari rather than Pavir Volokhonsky, for reasons which I wholeheartedly agree with. So yeah, I'll put links to that in my description, so you can go and have a look at that and maybe buy a copy for yourself. That would be great. I'm excited for it. It's all about the sort of civil war in Russia after the revolution. So it's a period I know a bit about historically. So I'm really excited to read some historical fiction about that. Right, so that covers that. What else am I reading? Oh, this one here is a long-term read. I've been reading this now for about 4 or 5 months. Margaret Thatcher, Volume 1. The authorised biography by Charles Moore, or Moore if you're English. It's a lovely edition. It's got decal edges, which is something that I appreciate, although it does make it challenging to turn the pages. This is the American edition, which has the subtitle From Grantham to the Falklands. I believe the English edition, or the British edition, has the subtitle Not for Turning, which makes more sense, I think, to a British audience. That was one of Margaret Thatcher's famous phrases. In fact, I think it is, yeah. That's the title of the chapter I've just got to. Not for turning. I think she said, U-turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning. So at the point I'm at now, she's only just become Prime Minister in 1979. And I have to say that I'm struggling to understand some of it, a lot of it, particularly the sections that have to do with monetarism and the ERM or the EMS, so it's the European Monetary System, the European Rate Mechanism, I think it is. Exchange Rate Mechanism. See what I mean? And these are terms that I remember from my childhood. So I was born in 71. So when Thatcher became leader of the Conservative Party in 1975, I wasn't obviously politically aware at the time. And then 1979 she became Prime Minister. I wasn't politically aware at the time either. But she is the first Prime Minister that I remember. And let me just say that in Scotland, she was not a popular leader at all. So I grew up kind of in that Scottish feeling of anti-Thatcherism. It wasn't anti-conservative as much as it was anti-Thatcher. And when she died, actually, there was a lot of horrible people, ding dong, the witch is dead and all that kind of stuff. That's how hated she was in Scotland. Partly because of the poll tax, which she introduced in Scotland a year earlier than she did in the rest of the country. I remember the poll tax. I think I had to pay it at one point when I turned 18. I don't remember when it was scrapped and it became the community charge, or is it community council tax as we know it today? Anyway, I wanted to learn more about my sort of growing up, when I grew up, and what the country was all about then, politically speaking, because Thatcher's been mentioned a lot, particularly with the coming to leadership of the party of Kemi Badenoch, that she was compared to Thatcher in some circles when she became leader of the Tory party. So it's quite an interesting read. I'm enjoying it. I keep it by my bed. It lies on the floor next to the bed, and when I wake up through the night, as I do quite often, I will just put the wee bendy light on and read a few pages of that. It's not long before I'm sleepy again, so I'm enjoying it. I do have the other 2 volumes, and they are equally as thick, so I don't know whether I'll get through them this year. Doubtful, I would say, given the other bookish plans that I have for the year. But yeah, that's why I'm reading Margaret Thatcher's biography. And yeah, as I say, it's interesting, it's well written, and a bit baffling in places if one doesn't have a grasp of economics. So that's that one. A new one for me, this has been on my TBR since last year. Moby Dick, or The Whale by Herman Melville. So this is a read-along that a couple of Substack writers have started in February, and I've actually got to the section that we're supposed to read for February, and I can feel that I'm going to continue with it. It is absolutely astounding. I did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I am so far. So I'm at the end of chapter 16, just to let you know where I am. The writing is just exquisite, absolutely exquisite. And what do you call it? Tandem reading? No, what's the word? Immersive reading it with the audiobook. The audiobook's narrated by Frank Muller, and he does such a fantastic job. So to have his voice in your head with the text on your lap, it's just an amazing experience. Here's a wee bit of vocab that I've underlined because it stood out to me. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally does, even with the Arantist topers newly landed from sea, and they began capering about most obstreperously. Arantist topers means hardened drinkers, or as I've written, big boy beviers. What a turn of phrase, Arantist topers. There's a lot of alliteration in it. I've written here, the tepid tears of orphans, that stood out. I've written down some alliterations because they stood out to me. Willful woe was one. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, that's chapter 1, the first paragraph. Better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. Didn't expect it to be funny either. But here you go. Bosky beards, scraggy scoria, bashful bears. Makes me think of that scene from The Office when, James, what are their names? It's the American Office, isn't it? The one with John Krasinski, when he does an impression of, I can't remember his name, the other guy, the geeky guy, and he says, which would win a fight, or which is the best bear, or something. That's what it reminds me of.
Question. What kind of bear is best?
That's a ridiculous question.
False. Black bear.
Well, that's debatable. There are basically 2 schools of thought.
Fact. Bears eat beets.
Oh.
Bears. Beets. Battlestar Galactica.
Bears do not...
Cones have congregated. What bitter blanks in those black bordered marbles, placelessly perished. It's just, oh, there was one. Doleful day, was it? Darkened, doleful day. I just love it. It's like poetry. The prose, it's filling my soul. It's almost making me tearful just talking about it. We haven't got to the ship yet. Well, we just have, actually, in chapter 16, where he gets to the Pequod. So the reason that this was on my TBR to begin with is that I read a John Irving book. Was it last year? Must have been the year before. Yeah, it was the year before. And it was called The Last Chairlift. And Moby Dick is kind of a plot device in that story. I do love John Irving, by the way. He's one of my favourites. And in that story, the grandmother of the main character reads Moby Dick to her grandson when he's wee. And it features a lot throughout. There's quotations from it, and that's how I knew that the name of the ship was the Pequod, and Captain Ahab and Ishmael, and, you know. So that made me want to read it. I mean, I've always been aware of it, obviously. Who isn't aware of Moby Dick? But that put it on my radar. And then I watched a film called Warrior. Is it The Warrior or just Warrior? With Tom Hardy. It's a multi-martial arts, MMA. Is that what that stands for? Mixed martial arts, that's it. It's a mixed martial arts film, kind of along the lines of Rocky in a sense, and the main character's father is played by Nick Nolte. He's a recovering alcoholic, which appeals to me because, you know, I am also, for those that didn't know. And he listens to the audiobook of Moby Dick in certain scenes of the film. Sometimes it's just playing in the background. And he gets quite into it. It's like, there's a certain scene which I won't spoil, but he gets really into the book and he's shouting as he's listening. And it's the Frank Muller narration that he's listening to in that film. So that's kind of why I was keen to get that narration, and boy am I glad I did. It's on Spotify if you have an account there. Spotify now has audiobooks, and they give you, I think it's 15 hours a month to listen to for free. Well, not for free, it's part of your account. And yeah, I keep running out, so I've added an add-on to get me extra time. It's another 15 hours. So anyway, that's Moby Dick. I'm probably not going to stick to the schedule because I'm digging it so much, and I'm looking forward to reading the Substack essays that these two Substackers are going to be putting out. I've forgotten your name, so I apologise for that. One of you's Christina, I'm sure, but that's all I can remember at the time of recording. I'll put a link if I remember so you can check out that. It's definitely not too late to join because, as I say, it just started at the beginning of February. Right, so that is that. I did mention War and Peace earlier, didn't I? Right. We've got this one. This is the Anthony Briggs translation, which is my primary copy. You'll see it's been tabbed. I read it in 2023 with Simon Hazel. And I'm reading it again this year with Simon Hazel, doing a chapter a day. I read this for the first time when I was a student at St Andrews, and I wrote my dissertation on it using this copy here, which is the Maud translation. This is an old copy from 1911, I think? No, 1943. 1943, Macmillan and Co. And yeah, I studied it at uni in my final year, analysing the novel and the movie by Sergei Bondarchuk, which at the time I only had a dodgy VHS copy of. Now, however, you can watch it on YouTube in 4K, fully restored for free. So what you doing watching this? Get on YouTube, watch Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace adaptation. It is absolutely magnificent. And the book as well is magnificent. So this one for me now has become like a comfort read, the most comforting of comfort reads. When I started it again, I was getting tears of joy, just the, oh my God, I'm reading this again. I know these characters now like family. I then went and watched Andrew Davies' adaptation, which for some reason I'd only ever watched the first episode of. So I binged that last month, and that had me in tears as well. It's just such a fantastic adaptation, and I want to watch it again as soon as I can with my wife, because she's never seen it, and she loves period dramas. Although, does she love Russian period dramas? Right now she's watching Mansfield Park again, an old BBC adaptation, which is quite funny actually, how dated it looks. Anyway, yeah, War and Peace. So what I'm doing this year is I'm reading a chapter a day every morning, sitting over there with the cat on my lap, putting out daily cat pictures on my Substack. So if you want to see Willow every day along with the book, that's where you'll find that content. And once I've read the chapter, I then read the same chapter in the Russian. So my Russian is rusty. I used to work as a translator, and I gave that up when we moved to Scotland in 2008. And since then, my Russian has got rusty. So I want to get it back to a reasonable level. Last year I did spend some time watching Russian films, listening to Russian radio, that sort of thing. This year I've ramped it up. So I'm reading the War and Peace. I'm also reading the Master and Margarita in exactly the same way. So I've got the audiobook, I've got the physical book, and I tandem read. It's starting to improve. It's been a month now. I can feel my comprehension improving. I'm also listening a lot more now to Russian radio. So I tend to work, when I'm sitting here working and I'm not having to concentrate too much, I put on a Russian station called Naše Radio, which is our radio. It plays the kind of music that I've always loved since I became a student of Russian. Russian classic rock and sort of modern rock. There's no Western rock on it at all. It's all Russian music. And I get to pause and listen to the chat, the radio chat, the weather broadcasts, the adverts even are particularly useful for language acquisition. And besides that, I'm also watching some Russian YouTubers, or booktubers rather. So I'm getting some Russian into me that way. It's all passive though, that's the thing. I'm not really getting a chance to practice, and I was never very good at the practicing side unless I'd had a few drinks. Obviously I can't do that anymore. It's a kind of inhibition thing, or a fear of being judged, or whatever you want to call it. I was never great at it, although my Russian was actually pretty good by the time I gave it up, when it was at its peak. So that's a kind of story about the Russian novels I'm reading and how I'm working at improving my Russian through this year, and I'm really making a big effort to do that, and it's bearing some fruit, and I'm happy to say. So I think that, oh no, there's one more. This one came onto my radar through another booktuber called Brock Covington, or Covington, not quite sure how he pronounces his surname. This one here, Black Earth by Andrew Mayer, Russia After the Fall, or I've also seen it subtitled A Journey of Russia After the Fall. And I just started it yesterday. Just felt like picking it off the shelf. I'll just start with the beginning paragraph of chapter 1, and this will tell you exactly why it's the kind of book that I'm going to love. Chapter 1. In the old days, before the breakneck final decade of the last century, before the end of empire and the epochal shift that followed in its wake, in the days when dissenters were dissidents and poets were prophets, when abroad meant Bulgaria, Budapest, or Cuba at best, when leather shoes and silk ties were not bought but gotten, when colleagues were comrades and strangers citizens, when HIV and heroin were exotic plagues born of bourgeois excess, when artists and soldiers pointed to ceilings and dropped their voices, when churches held archives and orphans, when lovers met in parks because apartments housed generations, when everyone professed to believe in the party, the collective and vodka, but in truth trusted only fate, God and vodka, I first came to Moscow. Yes, tell me more, tell me more. So I've read up to chapter 4. It's going to be fantastic. It reminds me a little bit of a book I read last year called Stalin's Children by Owen Matthews, in that he was writing about Moscow in the 90s when he was he a journalist? Yeah, I'm sure he was a journalist working in Moscow in the 90s. And I was in Moscow in the 90s briefly. I think it was 3 days when I was en route to Odessa. We stopped in Moscow for 3 days. 1995, August 95. It wasn't long enough really to get a feel for what it was like. And a friend of mine, a fellow student, because at the time we were students at St Andrews, and I think there were 5 of us, did the year abroad option. So you could either choose to do a year abroad and your degree was 5 years, or you could do a semester abroad and your degree was done in 4. So I think there were 5 of us did the 5-year year abroad thing. One of the students spent time in Moscow, spent the year in Moscow. So she'll know exactly what it was like. In fact, yeah, I won't say any more about that, but it was heady times. And I'm really looking forward to reading more about this. The author travels around Russia, so although we've started in Moscow, he's going to be travelling out to the provinces and other cities, and I'm just so excited now. It reminds me a little bit of Svetlana Alexievich's book called Second-Hand Time. That was a more reportage style of interviewing other people who had spent time in Russia before the revolution and after the revolution. So she does interview some people who grew up in the 90s, and it's just, in fact, let me show you it. There you go, Svetlana Alexievich, Second-Hand Time, The Last of the Soviets, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Nobel Prize in Literature, not for literature. I definitely want to read this again. In fact, maybe I'll just keep it out. So that's my catch-up for February 2026. It's an exciting time. The books have, if anything, increased in my passion as I enter my 3rd year now of being a booktuber, making content and writing my Substack. That's going really well. I'm enjoying it immensely. These read-alongs, I've kind of got my rhythm for it now, and as I explained, I'm tweaking the page count for weekly reads. It's just becoming something that is so rewarding, and I can see this lasting for years and years. Also, the community on Substack, the bookish community, is fabulous. See, being part of that, you know, all the read-alongs that are happening, it gives me hope for the world that there's so much love out there for classic literature. You know, it's just, in the times in which we're now living, you know, it's never been more important. I think one finds oneself through these classic works of literature. That's why War and Peace in particular has become so dear to me. I'm just learning so much about myself through reading Tolstoy's words. And I read Anna Karenina last month. Well, I finished it last month. And that was such an exciting read, which led, of course, to my buying the new translation that just came out, the Folio Society, which has been my most popular video on YouTube since I started, I think. So I'm very grateful to everyone who showed up for that video. It's really encouraged me to want to do more of this kind of stuff and to be less afraid about just coming on camera and being myself and talking about books, because, you know, sometimes you can feel imposter syndrome, or, you know, why would anyone care, you know, that kind of stuff. And although I do find myself watching other people's videos that are just like this, so, you know, that tells me that other people care because I care. So yeah, the book space in general, not just on Substack, but on YouTube as well, it's so wholesome in these difficult times. So thank you everybody for your support, to all the new subscribers that I have. In fact, I should probably have said that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Because I have had about 150 new subscribers just in the last month, which has been amazing, absolutely astounding. And I thank you all for your support, for coming on my channel and listening to this Scottish guy rambling about books. So I wish you a fantastic February. There we go, there's my own alliteration for you. I hope you have a good reading month, and I look forward to keeping up with you all on the internet. So, do svidania. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель. See you later.